Time to finish up those previews of the AFC, finishing up with the AFC North that Matt is intimately knowledgeable about. The scuttlebutt going on as he is at Pittsburgh Steelers camp, and we'll check in on the rest of the division. And already some big news as camps are opening around the NFL. That coming up right now on Peacock and Williamson.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you at Beatty Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Matt in Latrobe, PA. I am on the West Coast in California, bringing you this pod today. So, Matt, we teased a little bit yesterday. What's the scuttlebutt? Did you rub elbows with anybody important last night out at the Latrobe downtown bar scene? And what kind of dirt can you give us on the Steelers camp this year?
Yeah, I mean, Sharky's is a good time, and that's where everybody goes. And not as many people from the team go out as you might expect. They have early mornings and whatnot and late meetings and things like that. But no, there was a few out there, and it was great just to get back. There's no question about it. I mean, just that scene, everybody in the same room having a beverage or two, talking a little football, or hey, how you been, that kind of stuff. And maybe I'll throw out a nugget or two as they come up.
Mitch Trubisky wasn't out getting hammered then.
No, you don't see players. No.
Okay, good. That's good news for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We got to start there, I think, as it pertains to the Steelers, because if there's a player to watch in camp, it's their first round draft pick. The first time they've dipped their toes in the highly drafted quarterback waters since Ben Roethlisberger so long ago, and that is Kenny Pickett. Is there even a battle for QB1 in Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky, or is this straight up Mitch Trubisky's job to start this year?
I actually think it's more of a Pickett-Rudolph battle for number two. I mean, Trubisky's the one running with the ones. I only say that not because I'm high on Rudolph or low on Pickett. It's just Rudolph's been here. So if you were to play a game right now, he's the backup because he's the one that would get you out of the game. That doesn't mean they're higher on him than Pickett. It's just if the starter goes down, you trust Rudolph more than the rookie who's just been here. However, if you recall, 10 years or so ago, the Seahawks went out and signed Flynn, remember the backup from the Packers, and then drafted this Russell Wilson character in the third round. And at this stage of camp, no one thought there was any chance the rookie would even get involved. But they just kept digesting more and more, and they kept putting more on his plate, and Wilson ended up being the starter. So I think that's possible from Pickett, but it's not the plan. I think they want to bring him along slow, and they're excited about Trubisky.
It's almost like, you have to let Trubisky fail first before you're forced to go with a rookie quarterback, and unless he's that good, like Russell Wilson was. That was his calling card, right? Kenny Pickett coming out, the most pro-ready quarterback, 5-year college player, kind of like, and that's what Russell Wilson was too, right? He played 4 years at NC State before transferring as a graduate to Wisconsin, right? So it's, Pickett didn't transfer, but he's got a lot of game reps under his belt, so it's not like he hasn't played enough ball. It's just getting ready for the pro game. And I assume the Steelers are in, let's go win this thing with Mitch Trubisky mode too. So if you're a rookie quarterback, that's not a team that you're just going to throw a rookie out there because you want to get him reps. You're trying to win games. So you have to go with whoever the best quarterback is right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Trubisky was the opposite. He was a 1-year starter at North Carolina and came out and was in over his head and swimming. And they absolutely are in it to win it. I mean, a lot of teams say that. I mean, the Steelers absolutely mean it. There's never going to be a, hey, let's tank this year. That's just not how they're built or how ownership ever wants to do things. But it's a really young offense. I mean, Deontay Johnson is really like the oldest guy on the offense of people that are going to play. Like, here's the names of basically the starters: Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens, Dan Moore Jr., Kevin Dotson, Mason Cole, James Daniels, Chuks Okorafor, Pat Freiermuth, Trubisky, Naji. They're all like second, third year guys. And even their signings like James Daniels, only 24. So the offense is remarkably young.
You named one right there, George Pickens, and I already saw
I'm real excited about him.
Yeah, I already saw some flashes on day one, and he's just he's the type of guy that it was like this for him as a freshman at Georgia. He's not going to be overwhelmed by anything. He's going to walk in and he's going to ball out, and it looks like that's what he's doing already. Some catches on day one of camp. I know it's very early in training camp there, but you kind of mentioned him with the starters, with Deontay Johnson holding in and potentially no end in sight for Deontay Johnson getting on the field. Is Deontay Johnson opening the door for the guy who's about to replace him in George Pickens?
That's a good question because Claypool's in the mix. I think Claypool, they're going to try to move the slot with Johnson and Pickens as the outside guys. And the 2 Super Bowl teams are the only teams in the league last year that had more 3 receiver sets, 11 personnel. So they'll all play a lot. Johnson is holding in, but he was here working really hard. He did everything but team, I mean, and honestly, yesterday was a very short practice. I mean, it's that acclimation period, which I find kind of odd, but you can't get a ton done. Like there was one special teams, period. And then the other guy that actually made some big plays that is clearly the fastest dude on this team is Calvin Austin III. I mean, in a situation like that where there's not hitting and they got him a screen and he was just gone. I mean, he just shot out of a cannon.
Oh, I can't wait to watch him play. And I really love what the Steelers did there with those 2 wide receivers in the draft. Very different players, completely different roles. Is Austin going to run away with the kick return job too?
I would imagine. There's a couple other options, Anthony McFarland, but I would think he's a leader in the clubhouse, and they don't view him as just like a gadget guy, jet sweep guy. I mean, he lines up outside and goes against man coverage and did it really well in college.
Offensive line. There was some additions to the offensive line. I know it wasn't the best offensive line in the league last year. I have some questions about what's going on at tackle, left tackle specifically, but Kendrick Green in the mix with Dotson and Mason Cole and James Daniels on the interior and Okorafor. Like those are names that are familiar to me. What's going on at left tackle though? And how do you see this line coming together? Because, assuming quarterback works out for the Steelers, the line's going to be pretty important because you got to protect that quarterback, and Naji Harris is going to be obviously a huge part of this offense.
The O-line's my biggest concern, quarterback side, with the whole team, especially the pair of tackles. Dan Moore is a rookie 4th-round pick, played adequately last year. Chooks has always been adequate. James Daniels was a very nice pickup. I think he's already their best lineman, and that isn't even close. But I still think that here's the deal with the O-line is kind of like I just mentioned with the offense. Dan Moore, Kevin Dotson, Mason Cole, James Daniels, Okorafor, and maybe Kendrick Green. All those guys are 24 and younger. They're under contract for the next couple of years. They're very cost controlled. And remarkably, they all have a ton of experience already for their age. So they're young, cheap, and experienced. They might not be good, but they could grow together. And I think that there's a real plan in place there with the line.
All right, really quick here. We got to move on to other teams in the AFC North, but defensive side of the ball, who are you keeping your eyes closest on in Latrobe, PA there in camp?
Some of the new guys, Ogunjobi. He's certainly one of them for sure. I would say Miles Jack. He had kind of a rough year last year, as everyone did with the Jags, but he'd be a big upgrade. And this is make or break time for Bush.
Oh, that's really good, actually, those linebackers, Bush and Jack, because crazy athleticism for both of those guys coming out of college, right? And can they put it together this year? Speed is not going to be a problem, although Jack has had some lower leg injuries there. But those are really good ones. And when preseason games get going, they could really tell when the pads are on with the linebackers, especially. So it's almost more preseason than training camp, I think, in a lot of ways for those guys. But on paper, they've got that athleticism to range in both pass coverage and against the run. But I think pass coverage has been the thing for Devon Bush, right? Because, running hits not enough in the NFL.
100%. And didn't take on blocks particularly well. I mean, had some mental errors. Zone coverage seems to be a problem for him. Not the biggest guy. And he was coming off a major injury and just looked like he never really trusted the D in addition to some of the mental, issues too.
It was a great quote from 49ers camp, not to inject the 49ers into this conversation, but Azeez Al-Shaair was asked about what it's like playing linebacker nowadays in the NFL. And he's like, yeah, we're basically big DBs. And, his defensive coordinator is a guy that played a long time in the NFL. And he's like, yeah, at 250 pounds back in your day, you didn't have to catch that wide receiver on the over route like we got to do these days. This is a very different thing. So there's that's not easy when you've got a guy who can fly, potentially a 4-3 wide receiver who's flying on an over. You've got to get depth, you've got to recognize it, and you got to be able to get there and make a play on it. As a linebacker, that's not an easy task.
And every tight end of the field now runs 4.6, and they're not 270-pound blockers. Right. They're not Mercedes Lewis.
Yeah, and so you have the tight end hitting the seam, and then you got another over coming from the other side. So you got everything, and there's two linebackers cover a whole bunch of space.
And Kamara's running an option route right in front of you too. It's a really tough spot right now.
And the quarterback can run too.
No, of course.
Lamar Jackson's back there with Mark Andrews.
Why are these linebackers struggling so much? Yeah.
Interesting team there. What was I don't have it in front of me anymore. What was the record for the Steelers last year?
What were the record? They snuck into the playoffs. They were 9-8. Yeah.
9 wins. Okay. So over under 9 wins. How do you like this team coming into 2022?
I think the over under in Vegas is 7.5 right now. I kind of see an 8-win team here. That would be Tomlin's first losing season with a 17-game schedule. But if you look at their schedule or any of the metrics, Warren Sharp's metrics, they're at the top of the league in terms of toughest schedules too. So there's no easy ones. There's no gimmies here.
It's going to be a tough one, and they've got some serious competition in the AFC North. We've got to talk about notes from the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow, Jesse Bates, two of the best players on that team, not on the field to start training camp in Cincinnati. Baltimore and Cleveland have their own issues as well. Very interesting teams as we approach camp and the preseason in the AFC North. But first, before we get to those teams, we got to talk to you about Dave. Hindsight is 20/20, and you can't change the past. But what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank. Buy whatever it is you need to catch up on those bills. Just finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch, need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That is Dave, D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Matt doing Locked On Dynasty Football. You might hear some talk on that podcast about our Locked On Dynasty League that I'm about to win here in the 2022 season. Welcoming Matt Williamson to that league. It's been a lot of fun talking trash this offseason, getting that rookie draft in the books.
And as I texted you last night, I had a cold one or two with Mr. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, and he had a word or two for it's headed your way. And I mentioned that there's a new sheriff in town that you guys could battle about the top, but we're talking about dynasties here. I'm building a dynasty in Team Williamson.
Yeah, Williamson just tore apart the franchise that was built by former Locked On Cardinals host Bo Brock, and he's in it for the long term. I'm battling with Chris Carter. He got me in the championship game last year, but on paper, I don't think he stands a shot against me this year. So we'll see. Banners fly forever, Matt.
But we also mentioned that he never invites me on Locked On Steelers, and I never invite him on Peacock and Williamson because we both kind of have these teams down pat. But that's coming at some point. We decided we should at least have a little chat with each other.
Well, the listeners will really feel at home next time you're gone. I'll just have Chris take your spot. And
right. He's better looking.
Yeah. All right. So we are on to real quick. One more Steelers note. I got to ask you, Naji Harris. I'm sure some folks out there want to hear us talk about him. I kind of gloss over him just because I kind of feel like we all know exactly what to expect from him. But do we? No more checkdowns from Ben, or is there going to be? Clearly they're going to run the offense through him. He's an every down back. He will probably get as many carries as before, but overall usage could it drop down just because of Ben's, lack of arm that he had at the end of his career and just dumping it off to his running back in the swing back sort of a style. Are you worried about production from a fantasy standpoint falling for Naji Harris because of that, just because of the automatic catches he was getting out of the backfield, even though
in a way,
he might be
yes.
used in a different way as a receiver?
Right. In a way, yes. I think there'll be far fewer dump offs, just get it out of my hand, and then 3 people come and tackle him for a 2-yard gain on 3rd and 8, and there was a lot of that from Ben. He was shot. So I bet his reception totals decrease because he had some big games. I think he had some double-digit catch games in his rookie year. He did a lot of this at Bama. He did a lot of this at training camp last year as a rookie. They just didn't use it in the regular season. He splits out wide in the red zone and they throw him fades. He runs a more diverse route tree, and he has a real uncanny knack of one-handed catches over his head. He's got unbelievably long arms. So the degree of difficulty and the ADOT, I think, will increase, but he probably won't have as many catches.
Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow, appendectomy kind of out of nowhere and doesn't show up after their Super Bowl run last year to the start of training camp because of it. And I had to go scramble to the depth chart and even figure out who the backup quarterback was for the Cincinnati Bengals. And it is Brandon Allen.
It's one of the worst backup situations in the league.
Yeah. And they got a guy named Drew Plitt, Plitt, that I did not know existed until I looked at this. Jake Browning is the other name there. So, all sort of no offense to those guys, but noodle arms type of quarterbacks backing up Joe Burrow there. It's going to be tough for those guys to get the ball deep to Jamar Chase. But I don't think, it's not a huge problem, but it's also not great when your franchise quarterback isn't there for the start of camp.
Right. And this would have been Burrow's first healthy offseason in the NFL. And with his work ethic, he was going to thrive in that situation, really take the team over. It's going to be a while. I'm not a doctor. This isn't even a football-related injury, but I think it's going to be several weeks. And before you know it, I'm sure he won't play it down in the preseason. So, new offensive line, I don't think it's a huge concern, but I bet it sidelines him for a couple very valuable weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks is the timetable I saw, and that puts you through most of camp, and you're already into preseason games here as we get into August. And so you're going to jump right into preseason games? Probably not. They're probably going to hold him back from that too. So he might not get a lot of work at all with the first team offense. He's got to, especially with the offensive line, build a little rapport. So it's not nothing. Long term, it's an appendectomy. He's going to come back from that 100%, but it's really bad timing. It'd have been a lot nicer for the Bengals if this emergency appendectomy would have popped up in June rather than at the end of July.
A lot of pseudo doctors at the bar last night were talking about appendectomies, and some of them had them, and they said you really have to cut away a fair amount of valuable tissue to get there. I guess it's muscle and whatnot. So it's not just a little thing.
And Jesse Bates, one of the leaders of the defense, is not in camp, and he doesn't have to worry about any fines because he hasn't signed his franchise tender. And I saw a report recently that the Bengals were having trouble fitting everybody under the cap. Well, it's a heck of a lot easier to fit Bates under the cap if you sign him to a new deal and lower that cap number rather than him signing his franchise number and playing under that all year, because it's going to be bigger. You can manipulate the cap, and as the cap goes up next year, worry about those problems. So at this point, this is one of the ones where, usually when there's contract stuff because of the CBA and because players want to get paid and they want to continue toward free agency and get those paydays, usually these things work themselves out, and I've never been really worried about the Jesse Bates situation, and it's definitely taken a back seat to some of the other situations with wide receivers going on in the league right now, because I think it's harder to figure out what to pay wide receivers, but safety's kind of that position too. It's been a lower paid position than guys like Minka get paid a ton. I'm sure Jesse Bates is trying to get paid somewhere close, if not maybe asking for more than Minka, who knows? And so that I can see why that would be a tough negotiation. And now I'm starting to get a little bit worried about it for the Bengals and for Jesse Bates being in camp anytime soon. So no Burrow, no Jesse Bates. Those are the captains of both sides of the ball for you. Exactly.
And a couple notes here is I think he'll probably come in with an asking price a little below Minka's. Much like Orlando Brown, though, he's on his franchise tag. So this isn't a holdout. Currently he's not a football player. He's not under contract. He didn't sign, he's not paying fines for every day he misses. I would imagine in the end, you don't turn down a big franchise tag guaranteed payday but he probably won't be there for most of camp. Sign it, come in and play, probably a little rusty. I get the impression, and several people have told me, that they don't plan on paying him top of the market safety money. And I think their draft shows that. I mean, they drafted Tyson Anderson in the 5th round, Cam Taylor-Britt in the 2nd, who's a corner or safety. And then one of my favorites is Dax Hill, who's a, do-it-all safety, slot corner, whatever. Makes me think that they're planning on future life without Mr. Bates. And here's my thoughts on that. Is that's fine. If you don't think he's worth the money, don't give it to him. I do think they're really preparing for the day, and they're a, quote, frugal organization where they pay Higgins, Chase, Burrow. Like, I think that's what they're saving their bucks for. But I also think it sends a bad message when you go outside the organization and sign so many defensive players to solid contracts, and then your homegrown guy you don't pay. Like, I don't think that's a good message to the locker room.
I don't think it's a great message. I think Jesse Bates is a really good player too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting when they drafted Dax Hill and then they drafted Cam Taylor-Britt, because both of those players can play other roles and play with Jesse Bates, but they could also replace Jesse Bates.
Exactly,
and so it was pretty clear that they had a plan that could potentially go this way. And the more I think about it and just how you laid out there, really feels like Jesse Bates is going to be gone and going to be a free agent next year. And it's going to be Dax Hill manning center field for that team. And maybe even Taylor-Britt, potentially playing some safety instead of corner as well. So that's definitely one to follow, and one that hurts both the Bengals short-term and potentially long-term as well, not having Jesse Bates there. But yeah, he's not going to show up if he doesn't have to. And who knows if that's because what's the deadline? Like week 8? He could do the thing where he doesn't even show up until week 8. And if you sign your franchise tag, that's a big number that all of a sudden you have to be under the cap if you're the Bengals to prepare for that.
Yeah. And, practice is helpful. He hasn't practiced either, but whenever he walks in, opening day or week 8 or whatever it is, he's going to be kind of fresh off the street in a way. So, I mean, I think he's in contention as their best defensive player too. Hendrickson's really good, of course, but I mean, that's a big distraction. And then that matched with the Burrow thing. I mean, of course, I have to host a 3-hour Steelers show every day. So we talk about the division a lot and they're the opponent, but I mean, we respect these other teams, but I do think Cleveland with Watson, Cincy with Burrow and Bates, and Baltimore's got Lamar and some other injury stuff out there. The division outside of Pittsburgh has some distractions right now.
Lots of distractions going on.
Yeah.
Any other players to watch in camp and preseason games for the Cincinnati Bengals for you? I think number one would be Dax Hill to me, especially if he's manning that center field role that Jesse Bates should be manning.
Yeah, and I flat out have said this, that if I were in charge of the Steelers, I would have taken Dax Hill at 20. I would not have taken Pickett. I think Hill's a tremendous prospect. Okay,
next, Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Ravens. Plenty of issues, as Matt just alluded to there, and we'll take a look at what we think their prospects are for the 2022 season. But I gotta let the folks know about BetOnline. Tons of new lines for the NFL popping up every day. You can bet on so much for the NFL season, even though we haven't even gotten to preseason games yet at BetOnline.net. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Reviews and news of every league, not just NFL. We've got NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, golf, live in-game betting, scores, news, you name it. Everything's covered at BetOnline, the #1 source for all your wagering information and news as well. So check in on your desktop or mobile device to learn more about the action happening today at BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, Matt. Cincinnati Bengals, are you projecting a fall for them then this year? I didn't get your season sort of projection for them, wins, losses. Do you like where they're at? I loved where they were at before maybe a couple weeks ago, or actually before like 3 days ago, basically. And I'm a little bit worried that maybe the under is the one to hit for the Bengals this year.
Yeah, I love where they're at too. I mean, I'm jealous of where they are as a franchise in this division, without question. And if I had one quarterback in the division to build around, it would be Burrow over Jackson or Watson, But I do think, and I've thought this really from the start, and I cite Football Outsiders with this a lot, is that plexiglass principle, when you go from a bottom team to a top team, I mean, you're drafting Jamar Chase one year and then you're picking 31st the next. You usually take a little step back and you play a little more primetime games in a first place schedule, and the division's really tough. So I absolutely think they're a contender, but I think that I would probably lean towards the under and win total.
Cleveland Browns.
They're a tough one.
Unbelievable amount of issues for the Cleveland Browns. I'm trying to find their over-under right now because I think it's still off the board. Yeah, I think they have so many problems right now that their over-under's off the board. They don't even know who the quarterback is going to be. They got a quarterback in camp that's probably not going to play. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, trying to figure that out with Jacoby Brissett and get those reps. I mean, is Jacoby Brissett the guy you're watching in camp just to see what the floor or the ceiling might be for this team, for the Browns in 2022, or at least the first half, and who knows, maybe the whole year?
So this probably is a team we don't need to spend a ton of time on until Watson news comes out. And then maybe we'll do a whole episode on the Browns, because we really need to know this stuff.
Right.
I will say, talking to some employees of the Steelers last night, let alone all the media, everyone's shocked that they don't have an answer yet. That generally speaking, the NFL tells you their verdict by now. It's been a long time, and they're not saying it's right or wrong. They're just shocked that there is not an answer. So, of course, that's looming. Here's a really interesting thing, though, to me, if I were Kevin Stefanski, because deep down, Watson probably is not going to be ready for week one, right? I mean, or he's not going to be available for week one. I mean, I think that. So you have to prepare Brissett to help you win your week one game and presumably more going forward than that. However, they have 4 quarterbacks on this roster, none of whom were with the team last year. And I'm not really worried about Josh Dobbs or Josh Rosen, but they 4 quarterbacks, none of them with the team this year. Deshaun Watson didn't play a snap last year. You gave him the biggest contract in the history of the world, and he's practicing now. How do you not send the message that this is Deshaun's team? He gets as many reps with the ones as possible, but you got to get Brissett ready. That's going to be a balancing act for the coaching staff.
I almost feel like you have to roll with Watson through the first preseason game, maybe play him more than you would normally play your starters for the first preseason game, because essentially now
if he tweaks an ankle, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Yeah. 3 preseason games now. The second one is really going to be the only one that most starters play a lot in. And, you definitely don't want to get him hurt in the last preseason game, but I think they got to change it up and play Watson a lot in the first game. Let him start the second game, and then basically halfway through or, after the first quarter or whatever of the second preseason game, it's all Jacoby Brissett from there, and let him play the rest of the game or whatever, let him play a lot, let him even start into the next preseason game, and then start to get him ready in practice and take the QB1 reps as much as possible, getting ready for the season. Because, unless you're just playing for 2023, you've got to get Jacoby Brissett ready at the second part of camp to be the guy. So, once you go back to not training camp mode and, there's not fans in the building every day at practice anymore, then, you kind of back up Deshaun Watson and you get Jacoby Brissett ready. I feel like that's maybe the only way to go about this, because they both need reps and there's not enough reps to go around for both of them. So you kind of got to let Watson start, because he's played the least recently, show everybody that he's the guy, and then let him take a back seat to Brissett halfway through camp, basically.
I would imagine that's the process, but it's a little sticky. And you mentioned 2023. I mean, that's the problem here, is when you look at the Browns cap, this is their year. They have a ton of cap space right now, and I haven't studied it in great detail, and we know how people can finagle the cap. But my hunch is going forward, you're going to hear things like they have to cut Jack Conklin or Amari Cooper. Their window is really right now, and that's what's really sticky about this from a football perspective.
Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, the rookie David Bell's on the PUP list to start there. Even when you get your quarterback ready, I'm not sure if the passing game is going to light things up anyway. So get ready for a whole bunch of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt on this offense, right?
I would imagine. So I guess I have mixed feelings about the defense. I wish their defensive interior was a little better, but can they play small ball and, keep their head above water with Brissett? I mean, I know the running game absolutely is there, and the defense is talented. I just don't know if it's a good defense or a great defense. So that would be the plan. I mean, they run the ball as well as anybody.
Right. And that's got to be the plan. Play a whole bunch of D and run the heck out of the football, and then, win games that way. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is a budding superstar. He's not like a sleeper, but definitely a guy I'm going to keep my eyes on because he's so fun to watch anyway during preseason games there for the Cleveland Browns. Grant Delpit's an interesting name because he's had a rocky start to his career. And first day of camp, I saw some glowing reports about what he could be this year for the Browns. So maybe there's your sleeper there for the Browns on defense is Grant Delpit at safety, finally making good.
Yeah, I like a lot of their guys. Newsome, I'm really high on.
Yep.
JOK, as you mentioned, I think has a chance to be a star. Ward's a heck of a player. They got a lot of secondary options. They got a lot of speed in the back seven. I think they're a D tackle away. And I know that they flirted with Namakong Suh. That seemed like a perfect signing to me, but I wonder if they're worried. I don't know what the hang up with that is, but maybe he wants more than people want to give him. I don't know.
Or they need to save some of that cap for Jimmy G.
I almost said that, but I knew you'd get a little chuckle out of it, so I didn't want to go down that road.
Hey, he's the 16th best quarterback in the league. Go get into that tier if you're not going to have Deshaun Watson there. If you're the Cleveland Browns and Jacoby Brissett, I don't remember showing up on the list at all. I don't know what tier he was in.
I used to think Jimmy was going to end up there, but I think the only chance is if Watson's out for the entire year, even if it's a 12-game suspension. You can't come back in week 13 with Jimmy Brissett and Watson in your room. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. It's got to be the full year.
Right.
And that'll be the only way. And it sounds like, from what they're saying, it's going to be Brissett anyway, even if it's that. But I have my doubts there. But yeah, 8 games, you just roll with Brissett and hope he keeps his head above water.
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore Ravens over under is 9.5 wins for them this year. Deshaun Watson, he's in camp. You don't have to worry about holdouts or anything like that, but there is a contract situation looming for him. My player to watch is really easy. It's Rashad Bateman, and I just want to see that come together because I like Rashad Bateman. He's got the talent, had some injuries to start last year, but the path is wide open for him to be Lamar Jackson's number one, and there's plenty of balls to go around, even if it's not a high-volume passing game, to make big waves for Rashad Bateman in year 2.
Yeah, I still think they're a receiver or two short. And with all those draft picks, all those mid-round picks, they had 8,000 fourth-round picks. They still didn't add anybody. Supposedly, the Steelers sniped them on Austin. But I thought they would be more aggressive that way. I like Bateman as much as you do. I think he has a chance to be a true one. But I can't live with Duvernay and Prochet and Tylan Wallace and all those dudes. And
that's what's fun about doing this sort of a project is when you I kind of know most of the guys, but then when you really look at it and you think they legitimately have to roll out at best Devin Duvernay as their number 2 wide receiver.
Right.
And that's the best case scenario because there's not really anybody on the roster. I mean, maybe they have one of these undrafted free agents, Shamar Bridges. Does he turn out to be a star player or something? But there's not even a lot of names where you're excited about, oh, this guy could potentially be the guy. James Prochet is sort of a under athletic, maybe, slot, get open underneath, and that's about it. Sort of receiver, right? I don't think I'm reading that one wrong. Maybe
no.
Tylan Wallace, 4th rounder last year, but he doesn't, he doesn't really get me excited either. So yeah, it's Rashad Bateman and not a lot else. So Mark Andrews, draft him on your fantasy team.
Oh yeah, and I mentioned their 4th-round picks. Well, they used the 4th-round pick on Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler. They already had Nick Boyle and Andrews. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of tight ends on the field, which makes the wide receiver situation a little more palatable. I mean, they're gonna throw a lot of 3 tight end sets, I'm sure. But the other thing about the receivers is, like Julio just signed, Odell's still out there. Will Fuller's still out there. They would make perfect sense. But if you're a free agent, this isn't a very attractive spot to catch a lot of balls.
I think it's attractive for one of those veterans that looks around the league and they don't see a lot of wide receiver 2 jobs even open. So then they would say, well, I can go start somewhere and I can go make a playoff run. Who knows? Maybe get a ring, So I think that's why. But yeah, it's not like if you were going to get your wide receiver 2 job with the Rams or something.
Right. I mean, if Odell's picking between the Rams and Baltimore or Green Bay and Baltimore, right.
Yeah, Julio chose being potentially wide receiver 4 in some weeks, with the Buccaneers. So.
Couple offensive, I want to mention Dobbins, but
guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's been very little good news about Dobbins. That doesn't worry me as much because the running back is a replaceable thing. Ronnie Stanley is still on the PUP list, and this guy's been hurt with a very serious injury. I felt so bad for him. I mean, he signed a contract mid-season, played the Steelers the following Sunday, shredded his ankle, and hasn't played since. That was a long time ago. I think he's the most pivotal Raven for sure on this team.
It is a little bit worrisome that he's not ready to go. And some of those players that you thought would be ready to go, we'll talk about Michael Thomas, which, he started.
He looked like he was looking good
still. And then all of a sudden, he missed one day and then he's back on the field and it's looking okay. Maybe there is still some hope for Michael Thomas's career. And you hope that's the case with Ronnie Stanley too, even though you get a little bit worried for these long-term injuries and they're still not ready to go to start camp. And so a lot of crossing the fingers there because a lot of pups on the running back roster as well. Maybe Tyler Beatty, the 6th round draft pick. I think he's a really good receiving type of back. Could he be a main back for a while? I definitely interested in Tyler Beatty in some of my fantasy football drafts, just in case they're in Baltimore because they run the ball.
I think that's really interesting with him as a 6th round guy. I mean, more receiver than bell cow. He doesn't look like Gus Edwards, but he is a sneaky guy to pick up. I was high on Mike Davis a year ago. Remember when the Mike Davis hype? He's going like 5th rounds of fantasy drafts. They picked him up for nothing. I mean, Edwards and Dobbins are on the pup. I mean, he could be the week 1 starter.
A lot of fun players to watch here. Multiple 1st-round picks in Tyler Linderbaum and Kyle Hamilton there. So obviously those guys are going to be fun to watch. But man, kind of a steal in the 3rd round with Travis Jones. And now if he plays the nose or sort of plays that big 3-4 end, it's 5 technique type of position or even some 3 technique, whatever it is he ends up playing because they do have Michael Pierce there at nose. But I thought he was a great pick too. So there's some fun players that are really high upside guys for a team that's already got a lot of star power on it in the Baltimore Ravens. So I love what they did in the offseason.
I do too. I think Marcus Williams was a tremendous add. I thought they were in a good position to draft Ajabo in the 2nd round. And even if he sits the whole year, I mean, him and Owe were high school teammates and, the Michigan connection with the Harbaughs, like they know everything about this guy. That's a great landing spot for him to get well. Jalen Armour Davis was one of my favorite picks too. I mean, I thought his would be maybe a 2nd or even more like a 3rd. They got him 4th. I mean, when you can throw Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark, Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Peters, and Marlon Humphrey out there as your secondary as a big nickel, that's hard to deal with, So I think this defense is in a good spot. I think they do want to play 2 big defensive tackles like Jones and Pierce might be on the field together like Saragusa and those guys used to be back in the day. I'm a little worried about pass rush, and I don't love their linebackers.
You feeling good, though? 9.5 wins. Over.
I'm over. Over.
Way over. Okay, this is the division champ for you still, right?
Is.
You've been pounding that table for a huge comeback season for the really banged up Baltimore Ravens from last year.
Yeah, and I can't stress this enough. There's 2 things with the Ravens is since Football Outsiders, who's been in business a very long time, has been charting injuries, no one has been hit harder than the 2021 Ravens. Like there's no chance that continues. I mean, it was remarkable, and it was all at the same positions, running backs, corners, like you can weather the storm if you have some injuries sprinkled around, but if one room gets wiped out, forget about it. And they still were 8-3, I think, at one point, which is insane. And, to sound a little like a homer, I trust Tomlin and Harbaugh to navigate some of these rough waters more than I do the Ohio coaches.
Yeah, and I trust the Baltimore and Pittsburgh owners to get
the whole
right,
organization.
And the Ohio owners, too.
100%. There's a track record here. It's the same people in charge, more or less, in both organizations, and they've won a lot of games.
Yep. A lot of talent on a lot of rosters there in the North. It's going to be fun in the AFC. Matt and I are going to keep it going. We're going to check in on these NFC teams as we're in camp now, approaching those preseason games and the 2022 season. Thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Matt and I back tomorrow. No, back Monday with some more notes right here. Peacock and Williamson.